Welcome to Bridges Over Walls. I am Mitchell Kessler, producer and editor of the show. Now, I know that I'm not the voice that you are normally accustomed to hearing right off the bat, so I do want to clear some things up. We are working on season 2. We really do appreciate all of the comments and messages that we've received through our social media accounts. It is amazing to see how much first season has resonated with you.
We just wanted to take the time to say thank you for listening if you've been along with us for season 1. If you are just now joining us for the first time, we're the people that work on this show.
Yeah. While our time has been stretched a bit between different projects this year, we really wanted to dedicate time to working on this season. But before that,
we just wanted to take some time and do a little behind the scenes with three of us who, are really involved in creating this content and making it possible.
So I hope you enjoy this special episode of Bridges Over Walls.
My name's Kaleb. I am the host of Bridges Over Walls, and I am responsible for some of the logistics, choosing topics and getting guests, and, just overall tracking production of this show. And I'm here with executive producer Jonathan Russell. You may recognize a conversation we had with Jonathan back on the episode, I believe it's titled, Who Made the Show Anyway? Jonathan, welcome back.
Thank you. I have enjoyed participating and listening on season 1, and I'm excited as we're getting season 2 rolling and getting those things put together.
Jonathan makes this show possible organizationally. He makes sure that we have just a studio to work in, people to work with, and, just overall kind of giving us kind of a solid foundation and a place to work off of. And so I'm super, super thankful for your involvement. You'll also recognize that very deep radio voice that you hear at the credits at the end of every episode. And Mitchell, what do you do?
I'm the behind the scenes of Bridges Over Walls.
A little like the wizard.
Yep. You think the Wizard of Oz, Bridges Over Walls, is the big face of Mitchell.
So yeah, aside from generally sitting behind the cameras as we record and giving my 2 cents every once in a while, I do graphic design and edit all of the episodes and reels.
Yeah, I think you and I are probably the people who see the episodes the most times. I can't imagine somebody listening to an episode as much as we have listened to it before it posts.
Kaleb, how many times do you listen to an episode before it launches?
Oh man, minimum 5. I really, so our process, Mitchell and I, is a little behind the curtain. We record sometimes for 2 hours. With a guest. And so the process is really like kind of this back and forth ping pong between Mitchell and I of watching through all that raw footage, marking out timestamps of things we think will be really good, Instagram clips and TikTok clips, and then kind of overall making sure that we have something like a storyline.
Fitting together all the puzzle pieces and trying to make it so that there's a good through line through each episode.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times office building lights are off and you just see this lonely set of lights in Mitchell's office at 8, 9 p.m. With him still watching through all the content. Sometimes it's actually really difficult to cut some things. There are really good things that people say sometimes that fit not even a little bit with the rest of the episode.
They'll never see the light of day.
Yeah, I remember somebody asking one time for like the uncut version of a podcast, and our response was so fast, never.
Not a chance.
I think that's something that people think that they want. If you were to watch the unedited version of a movie, for example, just the hours and hours. And sometimes you have to ask a question a lot of different ways before somebody really understands, what you're going for. And, sometimes things spiral off into a story about somebody's dog when they were 5, and you'd think it would be heartwarming, but it's just, they had one.
I find myself wandering all over the place.
Yeah.
And I haven't done even the kind of longer form content that you guys have done.
Definitely. And, it's interesting when you start sitting down and watching through over and over and over. There are things that stand out as we edit these that sometimes don't stand out when I'm talking to someone. There are a lot of times when I'm watching back through and I'm just kicking myself because I'm like, why didn't I follow up on that? That was such a good point that I didn't hear well.
The amount of times that we've made an Instagram clip that honestly, the point itself would be buried in long form podcast, but as an Instagram clip, as a short piece of media, it hits in a different way.
Oh, 100%. And that's what's something that I've actually learned as we produced season 1 was when I listen to long form content, my brain kind of wanders, right? Like I'm absorbing the information, but it doesn't latch on in the same way. And there's been a lot of criticism for short form content and how it's shortening people's attention spans and all of this stuff. But there's some real value in taking each point and letting it stand by itself, of just saying, just think about this for a second. So if you found us on a TikTok clip or an Instagram reel, I don't know if you might know the behind the scenes on this, who we are, why we do this. Let's do a quick recap of the story. About 1.5 years ago, I want to say, maybe 2 years ago, we kind of came together with this idea on, what can we do as far as starting conversations around just some of the downsides, some of the damage that Christians can cause, and how do we have conversations about those things and begin to chart a path of healing forward. Do you guys remember where we were at kind of when this whole thing began?
It feels like a whole career since this project started, honestly.
Absolutely. Here locally, we've been through a lot, but then just nationally, presidential election right in the middle of a pretty traumatic time for this country. We've been through COVID, we've been through all these different things. And, the conversation around Christianity, around religion has just continued to be this very tense thing. And a lot of times, especially people of the Christian faith are associated with, certain beliefs, rhetoric, behaviors. And, sometimes I think we have some pretty major missteps and we need to be able to talk about them. So despite the many things we've lived through, the heart's still the same. As we've kind of put this together, I don't know about you guys, but over this past 1.5-year journey, I've really learned a lot about the world and people, their stories through this show. Mitchell, I kind of want to call on you. You're somebody that sits behind the scenes every episode. You listen through hours of people talking. You probably hear too much of my voice. But you really kind of, after the episodes are recorded, you watch back through them and cut them together so it's, as easy to listen to as possible. What's something that you've kind of discovered and learned throughout this first season?
Well, yeah, not to get too much on a soapbox, but the difficulty that Christian church at large seems to face is throughout history, it preaches the message of hope, but leaves this trail of trauma. The typical response that we as the church has seemed to hold is one of just sweeping it under the rug, not looking at the very real human suffering that exists. These conversations that we've had over the past year or so, we need to be able to say that we are willing to face this inequity and attempt to fix it. We don't just need to leave it the way that we found it, as our predecessors often have.
100%.
And though we might not know exactly how we're going to make it better, opening the conversation and learning from those who may have been adversely affected by the church is a big first step.
I like that. As I listen to these conversations, as I engage with the people who are engaging real issues of life, the thing that gets me coming back is that in almost every situation, the conversation turns toward how can we do better? I've been working in a church context for almost 20 years. Every day that has gone by for me, I look at the people that I'm serving in whatever context it is, and we ask the question, how can we grow? How can we do better? I love that not only are we hosting conversations that are real, but we allow ourselves to dream about how we can serve better, how we can grow as community better, how we can build bridges in ways that will make people's lives just a little bit easier.
And I remember a conversation that we had with someone after season 1 where they're like, but where's the solution? Where's the message? I'm like, we don't know. Like, we're bringing this forward and saying, here's a problem that we know that we need to look at. We don't know where the answer is, but we want to shine a light on it.
Yeah, I don't know that every situation has such a clean answer. It's not a science. It's really not. It's much more of an art. The science is care about people, ask about them, try to learn as much as you can. The art is, how does that apply to every life? How does that apply to every story? Everybody wants to feel seen, heard, and loved. But how we feel seen, heard, and loved changes from person to person and situation to situation. But if we can go into those situations with that mindset already, then we're already looking for ways to serve people. And I know for me, this conversation right now is taking me back to several years that I just disengaged with organized religion. I remember I had basically just lost hope. To put it plainly, I had lost hope that church was something that gets you closer to God or each other. Basically, I saw a lot of programming. I saw a lot of ritual, a lot of tradition, and a lot of the same things, the same sermons, the same songs over and over and over. But what I really was looking for is, is there an attempt to be better? Is there some kind of plan to move forward, to progress, to learn, to even change our beliefs if we discover new things? Is there any more to discover? Or is it just this cold set of, paperwork of recited ideas on how we read Bible verses and how we talk about them that we're just going to continue forever? Is there any life to it? And at the time, my answer was no, this thing died. There's nothing left for me. And if I want a relationship with God and other people, church isn't where I'm going to find that. And I remember, one of many things that kind of came together to give me hope again was there was this kind of traveling program called Is This Thing On? It had several really prominent religious leaders in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, along with just everywhere they would go, they would bring in college students and young people, and they would just flat out ask them, like, what are your problems with the church? Why is it so hard for you to connect with, religious spaces? Why is participation so low? Why are people not going into pastoring jobs? All of this stuff, and gave them time to really ask those questions very directly. And I remember it wasn't the fact that anybody on the kind of leadership side had great answers. It was their willingness to engage. It was their willingness to take criticism and process it, and also to hear what people were going through. And I think it was that act of hearing, that act of curiosity that gave me hope. It wasn't the answers. There was nobody on there that I suddenly became like, just a diehard disciple of this person. But seeing Christians, and especially those who are really involved in shaping the culture, being willing to say, hey, tell us where we're going wrong. Tell us where we're hurting people. We don't want to do that anymore. And we want to learn. We want to grow. Seeing that spirit is really what drew me back. Still today, I've never found somebody that I feel like has all the answers. Never felt like somebody has just a perfect guide to God, faith, religion. But I do find people who are about growth, who want to be better every day, who want to be kinder every day. And to me, that's worth engaging with.
Man, I'm thinking about that, and it's taken me all over the place, because what I hear is what we have also heard in our religious tradition. For generations, our religious tradition has just said, do better. Let's be more reflective of the values that we say we hold. And the better we get at being better, the closer we are to the return of Jesus and all of that. And so it's interesting to take that ethic that is over 100 years old now in our faith tradition of being better and applying it not to standards of the church, but applying it to the integrity with which we interact with people both inside and outside of our community. When we take that same Protestant work ethic of get it done and we reframe it toward treat people like Jesus treated people, I think the world would change.
Yeah, one of our goals is to create something of value for people kind of no matter where they fall. If you have any interest in a better future for Christianity, we started our very first trailer by saying that this show is for you. So, if I think about, religions that are not mine, when I look to them, what do I want from them? It's not just, hey, change your mind and agree with me, but can we align in character? Can we align in spirit? Can you also be a fellow curious person, a fellow healer in the world? Can you go out and do all the good you possibly can? And can you listen to people when they're hurting? That creates kind of this kinship, this bond with people across cultures, across, faiths. And we want to create that. So one of the difficulties that we've had working from a Seventh-day Adventist perspective is that we are somewhat of a niche within the Christian world. I think people hear Seventh-day Adventism, they hear a lot of words, it's kind of overwhelming, confusing. We've been kind of lumped in with a lot of other movements that we're really not similar to. And yet we're creating this show that very intentionally is, if we do it well, for people of lots of different faith backgrounds. What was kind of the thinking? I have my perspective, but for you guys, what's the value in creating something that's accessible no matter your upbringing and your current standing with faith?
The things that hold us together as humans are often more significant than the things that tear us apart. So in this context, when you look at different flavors of Christianity, there are some different specific beliefs. Beneath all of that, the foundation of all of that is certain core values, ways of relating to people and ways of relating to the world that maybe aren't focused on because they've been taken for granted. And maybe at one time they were taking it for granted for good reason. Maybe at one time every Christian grew up just endowed with the fruits of the Spirit. Maybe every Christian grew up living the ethic of love your neighbor as yourself. But somehow it's like we've moved past that. We've assumed that to be true and then focused on distinctive doctrinal differences. And in that focus, maybe those fruits of the Spirit that are recorded in Scripture aren't as relevant or aren't as alive in my heart as they maybe should have been. And so the appeal of this, I think, is that it brings us back around to the real foundations of our faith and the foundations of the way that God calls us to interact with humanity, no matter where they come from.
I kind of go back to what our working subtitle was for Bridges Over Walls, which is, You Deserve to See Jesus and Christians. Theological debating aside, Christianity should be following Jesus Christ. So, looking back to the statements that he made and the love that he showed to people is really what is, I think, one of the most important things that we can do. And that is what I see us attempting to do in this show, is saying, look, aside from theological debate, this is a shared narrative that there has been trauma through church, not just ours, but many Protestant churches throughout America all suffer from the same issues. That speaks on something bigger that we need to be able to look at and actually talk about.
I think that's a really important point, is that, a lot of the things we're talking about, they're not unique to the Seventh-day Adventist culture. Within Christianity, there are trends and tendencies, even beyond religious spaces, some of these things. You don't have to be in a religious space to talk about racial trauma. You don't have to be in a religious space to talk about breakdowns in communication between men and women. All of these different things are very human problems. And that's somewhat of the point of the show, is that wherever humans are, wherever we create groups and guidelines and culture around things, there are going to be problems that arise in how we treat each other. And some of these problems are universal. Some of the episodes we have coming up in season 2, one of the things that surprised me in some of our conversations was that there's actually still an investment in Christianity, even from people who don't go to church. There's still an interest in making this better. And there's still a willingness to have conversations around even things that hurt. We've had people on here who've really been through a lot and been really mistreated in religious spaces, but they're willing to come on. They're willing to talk about it and ultimately, do what they can to help make other people's stories better. And so I think that's one of the big breakdowns. You look online and you see so much back and forth, arguing and things, and you would think, wow, there's no way for people to talk to each other. There is. And you don't have to be Christian to want a better future for the Christian church.
Trust is built through conversation. And in the history of church, I think we have had times where we want to put our best foot forward. But then as we put our best foot forward. We want to put a veneer. We want to put a shine on it. And what has sometimes happened is that we push some of those uncomfortable things to the sideline. We think that that helps the church work better, but it ends up tending to marginalize some. When I think about this show, I'm reminded of something a mentor of mine said quite a few years ago. He told me there's a difference between activists and antagonists. They have similar observations, but their intents are completely different. An antagonist sees what's broken, stands back and throws stones at it to tear it down further. An activist sees what's broken and calls it out so that we can rebuild it. And I feel like that spirit has been really cultivated in this space where we can be honest about things that have gone wrong. And I think that that is actually in the spirit of Jesus. I mean, I think back through the scriptures, I can't think of a time that Jesus ran away from a conversation. He would lean into uncomfortable conversations. And through the conversation, people who wouldn't otherwise have been seen in their culture or in their religious community are then seen as humans in those interactions. I feel like that's the space this is, where we see people and then we can recognize that, wow, not everything we attempt to do works out really well. And sometimes the best of intentions have caused significant damage to people. And by calling that out as activists, and hopefully in the very best sense of that word activist, we can actually be a part of the process of rebuilding.
Yeah. Thinking back on season 1, I think one of the biggest questions that people had was kind of, how does all this fit together? When you imagine kind of the categories that exist right now, you think of maybe social justice being one category. You think of Bible studies being one category. You think of, we just have these kind of clean, cut and dry niches that in order for you to have successful media, most of the time you need things that are kind of fit into one established category really well. Our first season did not do that. You have everything from conversations around generational breakdowns to how we talk about grief to, intercultural history. And in some ways from the outside, I think this doesn't fit cleanly into those buckets that we've created. But I do think that it all comes back to one thing, and that's trauma. That's hardship and hurt that's caused by people who might have the best intentions, but really aren't going about it in the best way. And so whether that's a breakdown across generations, races, cultural backgrounds, experiences, it all comes back to that. How do we cause hurt, and how do we create a culture that really creates healing instead? And so looking forward to season 2, that's something that we've really leaned into, is just kind of these different ways of looking at these problems we create, things we might not have even thought of, and trying to be better. And there's something to be said for creating things, not just for views, right? The reality is that we get to sit down across the table from people of all different experiences and backgrounds, and in real time talk about and talk through some of the pain that they have. And it doesn't stop with the interview. We get to go get lunch with them a week from then. We get to keep up with them and really create a relationship that's facilitated maybe by a show, but that lasts a lot longer than that.
So I love what you have done in this first season. And as you're pursuing the second season, you're taking something that was created for the digital world and you're making it very real in the real world also. Not to say that the digital world isn't real, but you just mentioned it, how, it starts with an authentic conversation. And even if this landed nowhere on the internet, it was valuable time spent with another person. And you do that in lunch and you follow up and you continue and you see these people in other places. I would love to see a future in which this digital thing that is available on the internet would be a catalyst for conversation in the real world. What would happen if 4 or 5 people who see each other in the real world absorb this content, talk about it, and implement it in an effort to make the world a kinder place?
The push for actually building the bridges instead of building the walls.
Yeah, and I got to admit, I have a secret agenda. My secret agenda is that we completely reframe our approach to religion. I would like people to be transformed. So a little bit of my background, I didn't really have a lot of curiosity about other people for a long time. I was very resistant to different ideas on God and Christianity and how to practice religion. I thought there was one right way, and you do it or you don't. You do it, you're good. You don't do it, you're bad. Very simple. Over time, the more people that you talk to, the harder and harder it is to hold that view. You see how messy and complicated people's lives are. And so if we can do anything to encourage that spirit of curiosity and humanize people who are struggling with each of these experiences and look at ourselves and say, how do I present Jesus to the world? How do I present religion when I go about my life in every action, in every relationship? How am I showing the God I want people to believe in? And so if we can make converts, let it not just be to a religious, set of rules, but also a way of life, way of relating to other people.
I love that vision. I think about that, and I tend to believe that there is something that is ultimately true. And as humans that come, you and I grow up in different parts of the country. We had different family systems. We had different religious teachers that taught us as we cultivated our worldviews. And our worldviews or our perspectives on that could be quite different. I guess I see humanity as always on a journey toward discovering more facets of that which is ultimately true. The scriptures are very clear. God is love. God is not a theological construct. God is not a lot of things. But when God self-defines as love, it seems as if his followers ought to be more focused on relational wholeness than maybe we ever have in the history of religion.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're trying to do, I don't know if we always succeed, is to reach beyond our cultural moment. So when you look back at the history of Christianity and Christians and the things that we have done, it hasn't always lined up well or at all with the character of Jesus. So the character of the person that we serve, the person that we worship, this entity of love. One of the episodes that we have coming up talks about how in early American history, you actually had Bibles where several verses were removed, and those were given to slaves as an incomplete Bible because there were all of these verses that would have taught them about a God that wants to liberate them, that wants their freedom. And so even now, while we might not be in the time of slavery, we have to have this openness that our current understanding of things and the current way we do things is probably not in perfect alignment with Jesus, and that there are things that we can learn and change. And so identifying the ways that we cause harm and trying to chart paths toward healing, that's one of the most important works of Christianity itself. It's one of the most important works of serving Jesus, is to become more and more like him. And so taking that time to explore, why are people being hurt? Why are they withering? Where can we support their flourishing? I think that's one of the ultimate calls of people who take this religion and faith seriously.
I want to add maybe a little different facet to that as well. You talked about some intentional misrepresentation of a religious system to cause harm. There are situations in which that happens, and there are other situations where well-meaning traditions that were built on the right foundations shift their meaning over time. My wife and I were talking growing up. We were in a media-limited environment. You didn't see a lot of sports on TVs. You would never see gymnastics or swimming or all these less mainstream sports. For my kids, they are growing up in a media-saturated environment where they can watch swimming or gymnastics or whatever they want all the time. And so when we're like, hey, let's sit down and watch the Olympics, they're like, that means nothing to us. Why would we do that on a Wednesday night? And so something that was well-meaning on our part causes confusion on their part. And I wonder if there are many of our religious traditions that were anchored and were really important and significant and made sense to a certain culture. But as the cultural divide establishes, those things that made sense as meaningful traditions or meaningful perspectives end up causing pain across social or cultural divides.
And generationally, I don't know if we've ever had such a difference. Being born, so I'm a millennial, born in 1991, I was right on the verge of the complete separation almost of generations. So no longer could you count on going into a similar industry as your parents and grandparents, or communication or schoolwork or entertainment working the same way. So many things have been innovated and changed in how we do daily life in my lifetime. Maybe the most common thread is change, adaptation. You know, we don't get to come in and say, I'm going to do this one job for 50 years, 60 years. Probably it's going to completely change what we learn today and 5 years from now. And so with religion, you know, I mean, even things as simple as when we get up for the day, how we find information, how long we listen to one piece of content, one sermon, anything, all of that's different. The world is globalizing. We're learning at a breakneck speed about what it's like to grow up in different environments than our own, in different cultures than our own, with different experiences than our own. And we're flooded with all of these new things to consider. When we go back to a church environment and we find people saying, no matter what, it always works this way, a lot of times it's really hard to reconcile that with our reality.
The church is showing that it doesn't want to adapt to the needs of those around it, wanting to stay to this mold and reject everything that doesn't fit within that mold. For most of the next generation, the draw will not be sitting in a pew listening to a sermon. If our culture is just to sit down for a sermon and then go home, I can get the same impact from a YouTube video. There is no quicker way to make someone who has been hurt feel less loved or less cared for than to ignore the problem that hurt them.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm hurt by the church, the act of ignoring my pain and suffering will just be proof that you did not care for me. So as a church, or as members of this church, we have to be willing and able to sit with people through these uncomfortable moments that we don't like because we might be the bad person.
It's not necessarily in a church's DNA to entertain the ways in which they've misstepped. We haven't done a great job of engaging uncomfortable conversation. It's been at times where there's crisis that happens and we say, just pray harder. And while faith is core to who we are, and while praying matters desperately, and while spending time with God is really significant, it doesn't make up for the fact that that situation hurt. And so sometimes we mask, and we'll mask the actual relational pain with spiritual talk. And that has built a culture where if things start to get uncomfortable, we'll just pray about it and move on, instead of leaning further into the discomfort to see what we can learn.
The result of ignoring those things or not spending the proper amount of time on them is you basically become just a propaganda machine. It's just all good all the time. Everything's fine. We don't need to look at anything. And, people who don't connect with that can leave. And unfortunately, people have taken us up on that. You go from church to church, and if it's my way or the highway, a lot of times people choose the highway.
This may be a broader phenomenon than just in the periphery of the Christian circles.
Sure.
I think back over the 30 or 40 years of American life, and you come to Thanksgiving dinner with a bunch of people, and what are the two rules? Don't talk about religion and politics, right? So because of that, we haven't even learned the social skill of thoughtful discourse. All you have to do is look at the political discourse, and you can see that we haven't learned the social skill of thoughtful political discourse. Now, when you come to the church context, the whole context is religious things. And we've been culturally wiring people to not talk about religion. So now what are we going to do when things hurt? What are we going to do when we start to feel discomfort? We're going to do what we did at the Thanksgiving dinner and not talk about it. So people like this show, or spaces like this show, that allow for the dialogue that should have been happening at the Thanksgiving dinner all the way along, are gold. Because in this space, we can learn the common decency to talk together, We can learn from each other, and in learning from each other, we can build a better future together.
Bridges Over Walls is produced by the Oregon Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Our executive producers are Jonathan Russell, Kaleb Eisele, and myself, Mitchell Kessler. I'm glad that you could join us for this special episode of Bridges Over Walls, and we hope that you will join us again for our Season 2 in early 2025. Thank you for listening.